The decision that changes everything rarely announces itself. It doesn't arrive with weight or ceremony. It looks like a normal Tuesday, a minor trade-off, a small yes or a quiet no that you make quickly because there are 100 other things demanding your attention. And you move on, and life continues, and you forget you even made it. Until later, when you're looking back and trying to trace the line, trying to understand how you got from where you were to where you are, and you find it. That Tuesday, that small decision, and you realize it wasn't small at all. It was load bearing, and you didn't know. If this is your first time here, Richter speaks to exactly this kind of thing at the creator's mind, the invisible architecture of how a life actually unfolds. Subscribe before you leave. Stay for what's coming. Here's what makes certain decisions carry disproportionate weight. They don't just produce a single outcome, they produce a direction, and direction compounds. A 1-degree shift in the nose of a plane looks meaningless at takeoff. Thousands of miles later, you're on a different continent. The decision didn't feel like a continental shift, it felt like a small adjustment. That's the entire problem. What follows are the specific types of decisions that cost far more than they appear to, not because they're obviously dramatic, but because their consequences are delayed, quiet, and cumulative. The first type, the decision to stay somewhere past the point where you stopped growing because leaving felt premature. You tell yourself you haven't been there long enough, that you should extract more before moving on, that it would look unstable. And in the meantime, the environment continues shaping you. Your tolerance for stagnation increases. Your ambition quietly adjusts downward to match the ceiling. You don't make the decision to stop growing. You just keep not making the decision to go. And then months become years, and years become a professional identity built around a version of yourself that stopped expanding earlier than you remember. The second type, the decision to keep a financial habit that feels harmless, not a large, irresponsible purchase, the chronic ones, the subscriptions you forget you have, the incremental upgrades, the way you spend when you're stressed, not because you can't afford it, but because the friction of thinking about money is lower than the friction of managing it intentionally. The individual amounts are nothing. The pattern over time is everything. Because what you're actually deciding is whether your future self will have options, and small chronic habits erode those options so gradually you can't see the erosion happening. The third type, the decision to not have the difficult conversation with a partner, with a manager, with a parent, with a friend who has been slowly crossing a line you've been quietly drawing and erasing. Every time you absorb the discomfort and move on without addressing it, two things happen simultaneously. The thing that needed to be addressed gets slightly worse, and your tolerance for not addressing it gets slightly higher. By the time the situation has become genuinely damaging, you've adapted to it so incrementally that you can barely recognize when it started. The conversation you didn't have in month 3 would have taken 10 minutes. The version of it you'll eventually have in year 2 will cost significantly more in energy, in relationship damage, and time. The fourth type, the decision about who you spend most of your time around. This one is particularly invisible because it doesn't feel like a decision, it feels like circumstance. You ended up around these people because of proximity, school, work, neighborhood. But the amount of time you spend with someone is always at some level a choice you keep making or stop making. And the people you're around most frequently aren't just company, they're an environment. Their assumptions about what's possible become ambient noise. Their relationship with ambition, fear, and effort becomes the background frequency against which you calibrate your own. You are not separate from the social environment you inhabit. You are downstream of it. This is what the creator's mind keeps returning to. The decisions that cost the most are never the ones you can clearly see as decisions. They're the invisible defaults, the paths of least resistance that quietly become the shape of your life. The fifth type, the decision to treat a short-term coping mechanism as a long-term strategy. You started doing it to get through a hard period, And it worked in the way that numbing things always works. It lowered the signal, made the noise quieter, let you function without addressing what was underneath. But the mechanism didn't solve the thing, it postponed it. And the longer the postponement goes, the more the mechanism becomes load-bearing, the more your daily functioning depends on the thing you were only supposed to need temporarily, and dismantling it later costs far more than the original problem would have. The sixth type, the decision to keep your goals abstract. You want to start something, build something, become something, but you keep those intentions in a vague, unspecified form because specificity is the thing that makes failure legible. When the goal is clear and defined and dated, not achieving it has a name. When it remains abstract, you can always tell yourself you're still in the process. Vagueness is not humility, it's protection. And the cost is that abstract goals have no gravity. They don't organize your behavior, don't create urgency, don't produce the kind of focused action that actually moves things forward. Years pass inside the abstraction. The seventh type, the decision to ignore an early warning in a relationship, professional or personal. Something felt slightly off at the beginning. You noticed it. You minimized it because everything else looked promising and you didn't want to be the person who overcomplicated something before it had a chance. But early signals are almost always accurate, not because you're psychic, but because you're perceptive. You noticed something real and talked yourself out of it, and the thing you noticed eventually became the thing you couldn't ignore. It just took longer, and by then, the cost of leaving was higher than the cost of having listened earlier. The eighth type, the decision to defer self-knowledge indefinitely, to keep moving without ever stopping to examine what's actually driving the movement, why you want, what you're actually afraid of, what you value when no one is watching. This is the most expensive deferral of all because everything else in this list depends on it. Every decision you make without self-knowledge is a decision made by someone who doesn't fully understand the decider. And the patterns that come from that, the choices you keep repeating, the traps you keep walking into, the versions of yourself you keep becoming without meaning to, all of them trace back to this one. You are always making a decision, even when it feels like you're not. The cost is already being paid. The only question is whether you're paying it consciously. Press like if this landed in the right place. Subscribe to The Creator's Mind, and the next video is already waiting. Richter will be there.